With Street Fighter 6 pretty much out now by the time of this recording, there is a pretty interesting subject that I kind of want to bring up for this video. And that's the possibility of a Nintendo Switch port happening for Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter 6 on Nintendo Switch. Could it happen? If so, how good would it be, and should Capcom make it happen? Well, there are a few things to consider. The first would be that Capcom has been one of the biggest supporting developers and publishers of the Switch. There's already a good amount of Street Fighter content represented. Ultra Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, Capcom Fighting Collection, the Arcade Stadium, etc. However, another thing to consider is how Capcom goes about with multi-platform games. Most multi-platform Capcom games that release on Nintendo Switch are games that are pretty simple at heart, like their classic game collections or re-releases of games that have already released on hardware that is already generations old, like Devil May Cry or any Resident Evil pre-7. Now, there have been big games like Monster Hunter Rise that Capcom released on the Switch, but that game in particular is a Switch exclusive, so that has its level of hardware in mind. When Capcom releases big installments of their flagship franchises, they tend to stick with PlayStation or Xbox most of the time to showcase the hardware and the potential of their games. There have been some exceptions. Hell, one of them was in the case of a Street Fighter game getting a port on a Nintendo handheld of all things. I'm of course talking about Super Street Fighter 4. There was a 3DS port made known as the 3D Edition. Now, how well did that port turn out, you might ask? Well, you should totally watch my review to find out, of course. Though to sum it up, it's a very well crafted port that had a lot of time and effort put into it despite the sacrifices made. So Capcom already has experience with making a Street Fighter port for Nintendo's hardware. What's stopping them from making it happen again? Well, there may be a couple of things. First would be that Street Fighter 4 was co-developed by Capcom and DIMPS. Usually with a lot of big multi-platform ports, companies often have a third-party company involved. Now for Street Fighter 4 specifically, all versions involved Capcom and DIMPS. However, that does go to show that DIMPS did play a bit of a factor in making the 3DS port even happen. Another thing to think about would be that Street Fighter 6 is a lot more of a technical showcase for the franchise than Street Fighter 4 was. That's not to say that Street Fighter 4 wasn't a technical showcase for its time, it definitely was. But Street Fighter 6 seems to be pushing the boundaries of its hardware more, with 4K 120Hz being the goal Capcom had in mind for performance. Keep in mind as well that Capcom is also trying to redeem themselves from the poor launch of Street Fighter V and the overall bad taste that fans had for all this time, with little to no change to impression. So by focusing on the hardware that is more powerful, it would allow Capcom to make Street Fighter 6 a greater technical showcase without any asterisk that would need to be added to something like a Switch port. Now, there is one wildcard that could definitely allow Street Fighter 6 to be on the Switch: a Cloud Edition. As I said earlier, most of Capcom's big installment multi-platform titles have been on PlayStation and Xbox, but not really on Nintendo Switch, specifically in a native setting. The Nintendo Switch has seen playability of Resident Evil 2 and 3, along with Resident Evil Village even, in the forms of Cloud Editions. For those that are unaware, Cloud Editions of games are basically games that are streamed to the console, meaning you have to have an internet connection at all times to play the software, and a fast internet connection to play the title well. Basically, the developers stream the game from more powerful hardware to the Nintendo Switch, so the game is actually running on hardware internally at developer headquarters, and the Switch is acting like your monitor, if you will, to host your gameplay. So if we factor the idea of cloud versions, Street Fighter 6 could definitely see a Switch version. However, it's a fighting game. You should never play a fighting game that is always streamed to you over Wi-Fi, but you don't need me to tell you that. So we should mainly keep in mind a native port, not really a cloud version. So let's say Capcom does make a Street Fighter 6 Switch port a reality. How well would it run? Well, we have two sources to look at to come up with an idea. Those would be the base PS4 and Xbox Series S versions of Street Fighter 6, as they would be the closest to what the Switch version would end up being. Those versions of Street Fighter 6 run at a native 1080p, so 1920 by 1080 pixels, at a solid 60 frames per second for most of the game, with the exception of World Tour. While on Series S, we achieve a nice 60 FPS through and through, On base PS4, the frame rate is uncapped during the roaming portion of the open world, bouncing between 30 and 50 FPS, with the actual one-on-one fights being capped at 30 FPS. So what would that mean for the Switch? Well, for starters, I think having World Tour capped at 30 FPS through and through would be the way to go about with it. I also think there would and should be a toggle for resolution and performance, specifically to swap between 1080p 30 FPS and 720p 60 FPS. Of course, I think Capcom could make the gameplay go for 1080p 60 FPS, but that is also not considering World Tour, to which the base PS4 and even the PS4 Pro can't even handle reaching World Tour at 60 FPS. So what makes you think the Switch will be able to achieve that? Finally, let's talk about Capcom's Perspective and whether or not they should even bother with this idea. One thing to think about here would be the install base for the Switch, and it currently has the biggest out of all the platforms that Street Fighter 6 is playable on. Now, I know what you're thinking. Kumin, if people are fans of Street Fighter, they would probably already own a PlayStation or Xbox. Putting it on Switch wouldn't really do much. Well, this is where you may be wrong about that. One feature and goal of Street Fighter 6 is to get people that never touched a single fighting game to jump in and learn fairly easily. By putting the game out on the Switch, you greatly increase your chances of attracting more fans, as people who play on Nintendo Switch may specifically only play fighters like Smash Brothers and not really any one-on-one tournament fighters. So in a marketing perspective, this would really be a big move to attract more of a casual audience. However, while that is nice, Capcom is also wanting their game to be a dedicated showcase to the existing competitive community, which seems to be a slightly bigger target in this situation. So when you have a Nintendo Switch version, it would appear dramatically different, to the point where you almost have Street Fighter 6 with an asterisk, as I mentioned earlier. So all in all, this is the outcome I've came up with for a Nintendo Switch port of Street Fighter 6. Could Capcom make Street Fighter 6 on the Switch possible? Yes. While this would definitely be an undertaking, I believe that Street Fighter 6 could definitely see a port natively. How well would it run? Decently well, at least if, assuming we go by my logic I named off earlier, you have performance over resolution. Finally, should Capcom invest in the time and money to make such a port happen? Yes and no. In a marketing perspective, it's a great idea. Releasing a Street Fighter with some of the best tutorial attributes ever, with an install base of over 120 million users who likely have never played a one-on-one tournament fighter before, and you have a lot of interest coming. However, in a competitive FGC perspective, you may baffle some users and critics by making a port knowing it'll definitely be inferior to the PlayStation and Xbox hardware, unless you make it right, which Capcom would want to do. Now, Capcom has confirmed Street Fighter 6 will not release on Nintendo Switch for release on June 2nd, but they could always release a port later down the road. However, if Capcom hasn't already planned a Switch port, they probably won't make it happen. But you never know. Maybe someday we'll see the 6th installment of this legendary fighting game franchise await the Nintendo Hybrid. Thanks for watching this video, everyone. I hope you're all as excited for Street Fighter 6 as I am. It's coming out in about 2.5 hours by the time I'm recording this outro, and by the time I upload it, it may already be out, and I already may be playing it for the next month or two. So, expect to not hear back from me again from several months. I'm kidding. I do apologize for the big absence again. I actually just graduated high school. Yep, I am done with high school. So I should be free now. Who knows? But yeah, I hope you liked this style of commentary, by the way. I kind of almost made it have like a podcast feel, while still obviously reading off of a script. But I didn't like go so super deeply precise on it, obviously. I kind of just like let my flow keep going. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think of that commentary, and I will hopefully get back with you guys soon on some more Street Fighter content, perhaps. If you guys want to see more Street Fighter 6 content on the channel, leave a comment and let me know. And perhaps we will find our answers in the heart of battle. If you ever want to add me, here's my gamer tag, and you can always reach out to me as well through my social media in the description below. With that being said, thank you all for watching, and go watch some more of my videos. Peace out.